Yes.
Maybe your button. You're good now.
Test. Yeah. You're on. That's on. We're on. All right, we good to go here?
Yes.
Test. All right.
So.
Yep. Good.
Check it with.
Okay. It's picking up. Good. All right. Okay, let's get this show on the road, ladies and gentlemen. Well, if you'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. Call this meeting to order. And to my right, we have Mr. Frank Bruni, member Ms. Melinda Greger, and myself. I'm the chair of the committee, Joseph Greco. And to my right is Secretary Treasurer Michelle Kelly.
I can confirm that we have a quorum present, can move forward with business. And the first matter of business is land acknowledgement. I acknowledge with respect that we are in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and known as Bawating. Bawating is the home of Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. Mr. Chair, if I could have a motion for the minutes of the April 17th meeting?
Have a motion? Linda, all in favor? Motion is carried.
Mr. Chair, I've not been advised of any disclosure of pecuniary interest. Is there any to declare? Seeing none. Next matter of business, Mr. Chair, is a request for a deferral of application A1524. That would be tab 2 on your agenda. And Mr. Shoemaker is here to make representation for a deferral. And there is public comment on the deferral as well.
I'd like to hear from both parties, and Mr. Shoemaker, we'll start with you. Why should we defer your application?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the committee. Let me provide a bit of background. 540 and 548 Albert Street East. We all know the new Sioux Housing and yes Social Services building at 548. The old building is 540. There are two matters before you today. Both I'll raise, sort of provide some background as they're relevant to the deferral question. There's the severance of 540 Albert Street East. Okay, and that would separate that building and allow it to be transacted in a manner arm's third parties. And that is in the works to ensure that that building is utilized in an efficient and beneficial manner to the downtown core. Part of that severance, when we were bringing the severance, required, or we understood would require some request for a minor variance in the parking. We filed the materials 4 or 5 weeks ago or whatever it was. And as time has gone on, and we've been discussing the matter with both my client, Social Services, and Sioux Housing, and I use them interchangeably, it's become more aware and prevalent to the fact that we may not have a parking issue whatsoever for the severance. So we have the severance over here for 540 Albert Street East. It may ultimately, when the time comes, as a condition of that severance, be able to satisfy the parking bylaw in its entirety. It will be able to have the new owner, proposed owner, we haven't gone down that path yet. I can't disclose any further information. Enter into the necessary leases to satisfy the full parking requirement. So this minor variance piece over here, this application here, may not be necessary. So there's no point in putting it before you at this point, requesting a reduction, because the reduction may not be necessary. And if the reduction is not necessary, it'll just fall off and die out. It'll be withdrawn. If it is necessary for whatever reason, we can't get the 74 spaces. We can only get 70. We can only get 72. we can only get 60. Then we'll come back. Everybody who's concerned will be put back on notice, will reattend. And while we don't expect that to be the case, it protects, we believe, all the interests and safeguards those interests of concerned parties. And the reason we're asking for the deferral is because we really do believe that we will get the required number of parkings now as we've gone down that path to negotiate for those 74 spaces. And most importantly, for today's purposes we need to get that severance, even if it's conditional on the full parking, because we want to continue down this path with a potential third-party purchaser who's going to make capital improvements to that building, okay, as the proposed buyer, and will be bringing people to take up its space and be in the downtown area. So that's all part of the, housing and social services objectives. It's all part of what everybody wants to see from a community perspective downtown. And we're not shying away from satisfying the full parking requirement. So that's really the reason for the deferral. And if the committee has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those at this point, or I can answer them after we hear from other concerned property owners.
So it's a deferral on the variance, not the severance, correct?
Correct.
If we have questions for you, we'll come back to Mr. Shoemaker.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I just a reminder for everyone and committee and staff and attendees to speak directly into the mic. Live stream has had difficulties picking up, moving away from the mic, and I've done it myself. Thank you.
Ms. Kelly,
Mr. Easy?
please come up and we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated in my note, my two daughters are the owners of 135 Brock Street. They both operate separately businesses along with a third partner. They've been there for 20 years. They know the neighborhood and they know the parking issues that have developed, particularly in the past couple of years in that neighborhood because of change of usage of many of the buildings. And I want to note for you that there are several very large buildings for sale on the market right now that if given a new use to maximize the space that they offer, could just complicate things. So we're dealing with a neighborhood that has parking issues. Come by on a Wednesday, Presbyterian United has garage sales, parking all over the place. The businesses are having a hard time. If you look at the church that's for sale on the corner of Spring Street and Albert, I don't think there's more than a handful, maybe 10 parking spots there. And if that beautiful building is put to another use, I can't imagine that 10 spaces is going to be enough. Now, the neighbors were given to understand when the DSAB decided that the existing building was no longer suitable for its purposes, that the intent was to buy the funeral home, tear it down, build a new building, and then tear down the existing building. That's what the neighbors were given to understand. No problem. New building, maybe the same, maybe more square footage, but basically the parking for the users already there on the corner of Albert and Brock. So nobody got too concerned. I can only assume that the intent not to go with that plan changed somewhere down the road. And it became obvious that maybe that building could be reused. And quite frankly, I hope it is reused because it's too good a building to tear down. But that doesn't take away from the need to provide the parking for the building. And even though my friend suggests that you can go ahead with one and defer the other, I don't see it that way. I've never heard, quite frankly, of dealing with a severance application and putting the minor variance that is so necessary to that severance off to another day, and we'll see what happens with the tenant. I assume the tenant is going to reuse the building. It's going to be used for office spaces that more or less probably complement the services that are provided. There will be a lot of traffic. There may be as much as double the parking requirements that are there, and they're simply not provided. So we have a bylaw that needs to be satisfied, and we have a practical parking problem that needs to be addressed. And deferring either of the two and not dealing with them at the same time doesn't do anything to solve either the practical or the bylaw problem. So I'm quite happy to see both applications deferred sine die. Let them get their act together. Let them find the parking. Hopefully it's not by making long-term arrangements with the city in the existing long-term parking lots, which is already taken away from parking that some of the customers of my daughters and other businesses in that neighborhood are having to contend with. If they want to go ahead and buy some of the older buildings that should be torn down and create parking, that would be great. But I don't think one should go ahead without the other. They should be discussed so that people in the neighborhood who would have come here to a hearing today to put their concerns on the table are given an opportunity to see where it ended up. Where did you get the parking? How many parking did you end up with? What are the terms of the leases of those parking? And allow you, the committee, to have the benefit of their reaction and their comments. That's not going to happen the way this is piecemeal together, and I just think it would be a total error to take one today and deal with it on the basis of conditional upon finding the parking. Bring them both back when you found the parking. Don't deal with them piecemeal.
Thank you, Mr. Fertesi. Mr. Maker, would you like to make any comment to that before I get a discussion with the committee members and give my own comments? The both of you.
Thank you very much for those comments. And we do respect those comments, but the reality here is the bylaw would be what the severance is conditional upon. And the reality is that's what we would have to satisfy before we were able to sever 540 and sell it. Furthermore, those parking leases, or the old building, as I call it, 540, would have to be in the name of that prospective purchaser. So we can't do that right now. And it isn't sort of picking and choosing one and doing it piecemeal. It's just a deferral for the minor variance on the condition we satisfy all of the bylaw parking requirements. And in the alternative, if the deferral is not provided, for example, which we hope is not the case, that it is provided for, and we believe it should be provided for with all due respect, then we aren't seeking a deferral of both. We will seek a passage of the severance conditional upon parking that the committee requires, which again, at worst can be what the bylaw requires, and at best can be some reduced number that we'd be asking for that the city may or may not be on board with today. But the reality is there's no sense in going down that path. Today, we are seeking that severance so that we can see that sale process and severance process hopefully satisfied with the full parking, and then that building being used rather than just sitting there not being used.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair, any committee.
Okay, so first I'd like to make some comments here, and then my fellow committee members may want to make comments as well. First of all, I do agree with Mr. Fertesi on the parking matter. I do not disagree with him that, you know, you can't, this would be a major variance. And part of my duty here is to make sure that this proceeding is completed fairly for everybody, including the applicant. Part of that fairness would be, let's give you an indication of what our position is on the application, on the variance application. My own position on this is going from 74 parking spaces down to 0 is not even, I would not be in favor of any sort of motion to that extent. I think it's ridiculous, quite frankly. I think that, Michelle, I may need your assistance. I'd like to give them comment. Bring it back. I don't want them to waste their time either. What's the, what was the reduced amount? 45 spaces? Right.
Yep.
Right. So on that note, I think even 45 spaces would be too low. I think I see his head shaking over there that they, all right, good. So on that note, that's where I agree with Mr. Fertesi. On the note where I don't agree with Mr. Fertesi and I agree with Mr. Shoemaker is if the severance were to be deferred, or sorry, if we defer the variance today and we pass that consent on the condition that the variance be satisfied, if that variance fails, then the severance fails. So I don't know that that is a real concern, especially if they bring back, the required parking and then the variance is sort of moot. Am I correct in saying that, Ms. Kelly? Thank you. Is any comments on my statement there, gentlemen? No.
No,
Have I explained that?
we
Mr.
would have to bring back, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chair. We would have to bring back 7 spaces, and our intent is to bring back 7 more spaces.
Perfect, okay.
You wouldn't have to bring back the variance if you provide 74 spaces.
You meet the
The
bylaw.
variance would only be resurrected if you can't provide 74. And
Correct.
then the
Nice.
application would be amended to what you could provide.
When I say bring back, I mean bring back a lease with the new third-party owner for 74 spaces.
Satisfy the consent. Perfect, all right. Mr. Fertizzi, have I shed some light on that for you or?
Yes, I've never seen an application done this way. They would both be deferred, they'd both be heard. But frankly, I don't have a problem with an approval if the 74 spaces in fact are provided practically and in accordance with the bylaw.
Right,
If they're in the neighborhood, they're long-term, they don't interfere with the existing parking arrangements that current property owners have, and they don't complicate the existing parking problems that they're experiencing. I'm okay with that. And I think my daughters would be okay with that as well. So it's just that I've never seen an application. Quite frankly, he gains nothing by doing it this way.
right. There's no,
I don't know why he's insisting that you go ahead with the severance conditional on something that he may or may not be able to do. Defer the whole thing, go out there and see if you can do what you're saying and needs to be done. And if you can, God bless you, you come back. You don't need the minor variance. I'll go on record as saying we approve and support the severance if that happens. But what's the hurry? Get your ducks lined up first.
I understand. Okay,
May I comment on that, Mr. Chair?
if you'd like, Mr. Shoemaker.
We, and with all due respect to that final point, we do, I don't want to say gain in a way that I'm looking to game the system. We only can satisfy the severance by getting it conditional now on the full parking bylaw so that we can enter into a contract, an agreement of purchase and sale with the buyer of 540. And that buyer, once they have that agreement of purchase and sale, can then enter into those leases for 20 years for the 74 spaces. So we could only have done this together, severance and minor variance, or severance first, then minor variance. That's the only way we could have done it.
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment on some of the comments that have been made? And simply, if the applicant can go out and acquire 74 spaces, the consent to sever can move forward. The bylaw permits the applicant, if they can provide the parking, to enter into a lease for 10 years. It's only if it comes to the committee that the committee can require an extended time on a 10-year lease. So the committee, if they consider moving forward with the consent, can at this point indicate to the applicant the term of lease that they'd be looking for. If they're not happy with, as Mr. Cortese suggests, it's a big building, it could have significant tenant, it could require more parking. He mentioned long-term lease, and I'm not sure that he would consider 10 years long-term.
Maybe I haven't been clear. If in fact the new owners go out and make a deal with the corporation of the city of Sault Ste. Marie to rent on a long-term basis parking spots in the municipal parking lot across the road from the businesses that are operated from my daughter, I think you would want to know that. I think it makes a difference on whether or not they're impinging on existing municipal, and municipality's not at this table. I know it's the Social Housing Corporation, but if that's the arrangement that ends up satisfying this thing, it helps nothing in the neighborhood. So I think we need to see where those parking spaces are being created and provided. Yes, long-term, but if they're in a municipal parking lot that's already overtaxed, already has businesses in it so that it's not available for, some of the, I don't think that resolves the problem. So that was my concern, and I probably didn't make myself clear earlier, so.
And if I can record this correctly, when we make a motion on whether the variance will be deferred, regardless. If we move to the consent application, Mr. Fertese will be requesting a deferral. And we have heard his reasons for it, and he can reiterate.
Mr. Shoemaker, I have a question. So is the length of lease that you guys are looking for, it's a 20-year lease that you'll be locking into, agreeing to? Is that what we're looking for here? Is that what you're looking to attain from some landowner?
Yes, the committee will decide on the length. If it's 10, then it has to be 10. If it's 20, we're more than happy to have the severance conditional on the 20. We believe there's multiple opportunities and possibilities for parking within, I believe, the 300 square meters, if I'm correct, of the 540 address. And so we have to satisfy the conditions that are conditional for the severance to be achieved. We have to satisfy those. So we're in the committee's hands in that respect as to what those conditions are.
Where the perspective, you have prospective areas where you're looking to lease these parking spaces?
We do have some prospective spaces, and some of those would be spaces involving the municipality in and around that 300 square meters. Some would not be the municipality, as we have other partners and institutions, government or quasi-government institutions that we could lease from as well. And when I say we, Social Services / Soo Housing is the applicant, but the lease will be in the name of the third-party owner of 540 Albert Street when it sells to them. And it has to.
Because a 10-year lease would not be enough to satisfy the consent. Okay, I see head shaking.
We're fine with that.
Okay.
I think that's just provided for instruction to the applicant, right?
Comments from committee members
On the deferral.
on the.
So I do have a question. So just so I'm clear, because there's been different terminology and I think we closed the loop. The severance is conditional on the parking. There is no minor variance component. You intend to meet the bylaw parking requirements. Okay, correct. So I understand that. I think Mr. Fertese asked a question of, it's maybe peculiar. Why are you doing this in two separate? Why don't you just resolve it all? And I can appreciate, the business decision side of it to be able to move an APS forward. The question I have for parking is, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but if you go and you lease parking spaces from an existing owner of a building and you lease those spaces and they therefore don't meet their requirements of parking, how is that addressed?
Using contravention.
Okay, so that can't happen.
The applicant or owner, whoever's benefiting from the lease, would have to satisfy building division that they've entered into this lease. Building division in turn would have to be satisfied that their minimum required parking is not impacted by the lease, by a potential lease.
If I can comment, I think partly what you may be wondering or indicating, and I'm just sort of just guessing here, so I apologize. I don't want to put any words in your mouth. The prospective purchaser of 540 Albert Street, they would not be going and entering into a 20-year parking lease and then breaching someone else's lease of any nature. Because we couldn't do that. We can't go and overlap their contract with our new contract, which is essentially what a lease is.
I think
So
what he's saying is take away from their use, putting them into contravention. So if I own a building somewhere, I'm gonna lease to you, but now I don't have enough spots to cover my requirements.
Yeah.
I think
Well, and that couldn't happen because
the building department's gonna stop that.
correct.
I just question was, is there a loophole that you can work that? And it's been answered that, no, you can't because it is reviewed by the city and that component is then verified. That's kind of what I was just, so the question has been answered.
I think, Mr. Fertesi, that sort of addresses your concerns as well with the,
Something else confirms to me that the city of Sault Ste. Marie municipal parking lot is likely going to be the source of this parking. That doesn't help the practical problem of parking in that neighborhood. And I went for a ride around the blocks to see what was available. Unless you're buying old buildings and tearing them down, there isn't excess parking that any of the businesses really can offer up. So I'm concerned that it's going to be municipal parking that's provided. And I know I should take that up with the municipality, but you're the folks that are looking at this application today, and I need to make that a part of the record.
thank you, sir. Don't know that we can comment on where the parking is obtained. I think that is out of our scope. I can't control, this committee can't control what arrangements are made with another party who agrees to make those arrangements. So I can't give any comment on that because again, it's out of our jurisdiction. Perhaps a call to, an alderman or somebody like that would be the best way to go, and they'll probably get something done on that front. I don't have any more comments or questions. Does anybody else have any comments or questions before we move forward, Pearl, or not?
I don't have any questions. I had questions at the beginning. I thought kind of it was just an easy, well, not easy, but I thought both would be deferred. So I didn't realize that we were looking at both separately. But now I think after hearing Mr. Shoemaker, I've realized why the conveyance is gonna go through or not defer, or we'll vote on it. So that's been answered. So that's why I don't have any questions or comments.
Have any?
I can have a motion for deferral.
This is just for the minor variance, right?
Is,
Deferral for the variance. Or do you?
if you get a motion on the floor for the deferral and then consider it.
Okay, can we have a motion for a deferral on the variance applications? Their motion.
I'll put a motion forward.
Second for that. Motion.
I'll second for the deferral on the minor variance.
All in favor?
That will form the condition on the consent. So if I can bring the committee's attention, then we'll move right to the consent. And that would be tab 3 on your agenda. Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation is the owner of Civic number 540 Albert Street East, further identified as roll number 020-038-057-00000, PIN 31542-0392. Former Township of St. Mary's, the property is irregular in shape and abuts McDougald Street to the north, Albert Street East, and Brock Street to the east. It is approximately 0.38 hectares in size. The subject property is designated commercial in the official plan and is zoned C2 Central Commercial Zone. Subject to the final approval of minor variance application A1524. So that application would either have to be approved or withdrawn. The applicant is seeking the committee's consent to sever and convey the old office site from the new office site, together with mutual easements amongst both proposed sites and Civic number 168 McDougald Street for access egress purposes. The proposed parcel configuration is the severed parcel, 39.20 meters on Albert Street, a length of 33.91 meters and an approximate area of 0.015 hectares. The retained lands would have a frontage of 85.83 meters, a depth of 30.11 meters, and an approximate area of 0.024 hectares. Easements are also requested over the proposed and retained lands for access egress to Brock Street for 168 McDougald. The retained lands for proposed severed lands for access egress to McDougald Street, and the severed lands over proposed retained lands for access egress to Brock Street. Simply mutual easements for the existing access egress that is currently in use. Notice of public hearing sent by personal mail to neighboring properties, by posting a sign on site, and by posting on the city website. Mr. Fertesi, I have your comments. Can I read them into the record, or would you prefer just to speak? Okay. Mr. J. Fertesi, agent for the owners of Civic number 135 Brock Street, had the following comments. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me about the above applications which have been filed by Sault Ste. Marie Housing Corporation for its property at 540 Albert Street East. I have spoken to Jeff Barvin about these applications as well. My daughters, Krista Fertesi Williams and Lisa Fertesi Cachemilio, have owned and operated their small businesses located at 135 Brock Street for over 20 years and have asked me to express their concerns about what the Housing Corporation is asking for. I can only assume that this was not addressed prior to the issue of a permit for the new DSAB building, because the original plan was to take this building down after the new one was completed. This obviously has changed, and the intent is now to keep both buildings and to use both on a long-term basis. That being the case, the parking requirements for both buildings, in accordance with the city's bylaws, need to be met. Informal arrangements might provide a practical solution to needed parking, but should never be accepted to satisfy parking requirements of the city bylaws. The Housing Corporation should be held to the same standards as any other property owner. While its current plans and proposed tenants of the old building might get by on informal parking arrangements, there is no guarantee that the required parking will be available on a long-term basis. Things change, directions change, ownerships change. That is why we have bylaws that nail down parking. The whole issue of parking for the Brock Street neighborhood was very recently discussed in the context of the relocation of the Millmart to the neighborhood, as well as the construction of the new, but controversial downtown plaza. Businesses such as my daughters are already concerned about the compromises that have already been made to the parking requirements for their neighborhood. Reducing the parking requirements for 540 Albert Street East from the bylaw requirement of 74 spaces to 0 cannot be seen as minor and should not be the subject of a variance application to the Committee of Adjustments. It is actually a major reduction and actual complete deletion of both what is practically needed for parking as well as the bylaw requirements for parking. The variance application should be denied and so should the severance application until the parking requirements for both the new and the old buildings are satisfied. The same standards that are to be met by private developers in our community should be met by municipal and quasi-municipal agencies such as the DSAB and the Housing Corporation, because future ownership of any property cannot be guaranteed. Approving these applications will simply make an existing situation worse. As part of the application review, this proposal was circulated to the following internal departments and external agencies for their review. The Accessibility Committee advised that any approval to be considered on entering into a lease with the owners of 548 Albert Street East to share the barrier-free parking spaces illustrated on the site plan to be designed in accordance with bylaw provisions. Algoma Public Health had no comment as it's municipally serviced. Bell Canada early this morning advised that they had no comment. Building Division staff advised that any approval resulting in required parking spaces must be in accordance with all provisions of Section 5 of Zoning Bylaw 2005-150, specifically subsection 5.3.5. Canada Post Conservation Authority and the Downtown Association did not respond. Engineering and Construction advised that the original site plan approval has temporary conditions for the parking lot and sidewalk between the two buildings. Future elevations in the parking area and walkways were to be raised significantly once the existing building was demolished. Confirmation should be provided that the grading and servicing of the parking and walkways will meet current standards if the building is to remain. A site plan amendment may be required. Fire Services had no comment. Legal Department had no comment. Planning Division had no objections conditional on an amended and improved variance request. PUC Distribution, Electric had no concerns. Public Utilities Commission had no concerns. Public Works had no comment. I should read planning's comment to you. Excuse me, just want to pull the. I'd like to go into the full comment, not just the amended comment that planning suggests. As proposed, planning is not supportive of the requested variance as requested. The request does not meet the 4 tests of a minor variance, in particular those portions that require the request to be minor and with keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw. While parking reductions from the zoning bylaw have been approved and a parking study is underway, there is no precedent for eliminating all the parking requirements on site for a location. Additionally, the provision of barrier-free spaces is important for ensuring proper access to sites for those who require these spaces. Planning would be supportive of a reduction in spaces of 40%, as this has been applied in other similar situations where access to alternative transit options are available. A reduction of 40% would see the requirement drop to 2.1 spaces per 100 square meters, resulting in a requirement of 45 spaces. As per 5.3.5 of the zoning bylaw, these spaces may be located on neighboring property within 300 meters of the subject site and are recommended to enter into an agreement for 20 years. The barrier-free spaces will also need to be maintained and can be located through a shared agreement with the adjoining property whereby these spaces must be located on an accessible path of travel with direct access to the sidewalk to the building. The staff comments are, the agent for the 2 neighboring property owners requested that the consent application be refused until the parking requirements for both the old and the new are satisfied in such a way so as to guarantee that the arrangements remain in place for future owners. Since that time, Mr. Fertizzi has indicated, and he will speak, that he's suggesting that a deferral of the consent would be in order. Recommendations, if approval were to move forward, recommended conditions are payment of cash in lieu of parkland, payment of transfer review fee, provide a transfer deed of land, provide reference plan, provide PIN abstract and PIN map, minor variance application if required, discharge of charge or mortgage, partial discharge of charge or mortgage, payment of taxes, provide verification with which demonstrates that appropriate parkman arrangements are in place in accordance with section 5.3.5 of zoning bylaw 2005-150 to the satisfaction of the chief building official or his designate. And those are my submissions, Mr. Chair.
Kelly? As you're reading that application, I was thinking, question for Mr. Shu.
Presentation.
Okay. Like to go first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Secretary, and the committee. I think you've heard the vast majority of what I have to say about the entirety of the matter. Given the deferral of the minor variance, anything and everything related to parking, we are saying that the applicant and proposed purchaser would be open and willing and satisfied with the condition that the full amount of parking be a condition of severance. And that I've already said the severance would provide what we believe to be benefits to the downtown area, jobs as well to the downtown area, and that we would only get that severance on satisfaction of that full parking bylaw. And if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
One question.
Yes.
Side of this committee, I think it's very well known I'm a real estate lawyer in town. I mean, I understand how an agreement of purchase and sale works. And as I'm sitting here listening to Michelle, and I'm thinking about everything that's been said here, and you know, you have an agreement of purchase and sale that's going to be conditional on essentially a severance and a variance, because the severance is only going to go if the variance goes. Or
Well, the severance.
or not. It
Yeah.
depends if you meet your. Why can't you make an agreement of purchase and sale just conditional on everything? And you know, if this committee decided that they wanted to defer this consent as well, your conditions in your APS would cover you know, your buyer
Well,
and yourselves.
the buyer is going to require certainty on the severance. And he'll have that certainty if the severance is approved today. And conditional on, we will enter into 20-year parking arrangements within 300 meters of 540 Albert Street East. Well, assuming that, I believe the 20-year was indicated as city recommendation. So we don't even need to take up planning's recommendation of the 40% reduction. And we don't anticipate ever needing to take that up. Now, when we enter into this agreement of purchase and sale, we can enter into it on the much firmer basis that the severance, hopefully, fingers crossed, through this committee today, will be approved on, and we know the conditions explicit.
Great. So perhaps that variance should be withdrawn if you have no need for it.
It likely will be withdrawn. I think we'd be a bit presumptive to make that call today. I mean,
Transactionally, I'm having trouble understanding why the agreement can't be made conditional. It's going to be conditional on this no matter what. You're going to have a conditional agreement of purchase and sale. So what, in the instance that you're coming back for a variance, then your condition may not be met,
sure,
right?
that's true. That's true. But
Taking what
there's,
taking what Mr. Fertese is saying, I'm taking my knowledge of a transaction and I'm looking at this logistically. And I don't understand why why that agreement can't be made conditional upon the approval of whatever needs to be made approved on.
well, that would be, with all due respect, Mr. Chair, when we enter into this agreement of purchase and sale, hopefully tomorrow or the next day or Monday, Tuesday, I guess, it would already have the severance approved and attached to it. Here's now what you as the new owner needs to do to obtain those parking spaces. If you get 74 of them, you satisfy the CBO, 20-year leases. And now they have a contract saying all they need is those spaces, as opposed to we need the spaces and the severance and everything else under the sign.
That's a conditional approval. It's not approved.
Correct. It's a conditional approval of the severance. Yeah.
So it's conditional no matter what. All right, that's my question.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And we believe that it's a much more straightforward condition
I see where it's I can see where you're going.
logistically.
You know, you're not having to come back and whatever. I see that. I need to understand what the thinking here is, and transactionally, in my opinion, it makes no difference, but that's just, I had to ask that question. I'll let my fellow committee members ask you any further questions, and we can put a motion for something on here.
Well, yeah, we may want to.
Jumping the gun, I apologize. Been a long afternoon.
For me, this gets quirkier and quirkier. Mr. Chair, I agree with your most recent comment. I too have done my share of real estate transactions over the years, and for the life of me, can't see why what you've suggested isn't the way to proceed. Mr. Shoemaker came to this hearing today. I think he can leave here with a good feeling that if he provides parking, the committee, those who've shown to make comments from the neighborhood, all support the application. He's not going to go out based on getting a conditional approval and hire the surveyor to do the 1R plan. He's not going to do any of that until he knows he's got his parking secured. So he doesn't advance his cause at all. He can go to his client, simply say, I went to the hearing. Look, if we can find the parking, we're going to be okay. The committee seemed to be on board. The people who showed up to express concerns, they're okay if we provide the parking. And that should be enough for him to enter into his conditional sales agreement. And I share your observation. There's something uneasy about going piecemeal that I think needs to be addressed. And if Mr. Shoemaker wants to make sure that there's peace in the neighborhood, then I would think he would agree that the position that's been put on the floor makes sense. And why ruffle feathers? He's going away with nothing more than a conditional. Okay, he doesn't have his severance. If he gets what he wants today, he's got approval based on him finding parking. I don't think that's all that different than what we've suggested. So,
Thank you, Mr. Fertesi. Comments from members?
Yeah, I have comments. I think, what's drafted may have been kind of ahead of what we're discussing today. So I think, if we remove the minor variance component of this, just to get that off, because it's confusing. We're talking in one sense, the paperwork is saying another. So, in my, based on the earlier deferral, we should just remove the minor variance component of the application of the requirements to avoid it, so that, yes, the intent is to meet parking bylaw requirements. And I think that would provide clarity for myself. And then the only other comment other than the staff recommendation, so I would suggest we remove the minor variance application component of it. So it's not conflicting with the last point, which is meeting the bylaw zoning to the satisfaction of the chief building official or its designate. And then we just add the one component just so that engineering and construction's comments are satisfied with respect to, I don't know if it's an amendment to the site plan or that condition is of elevation is addressed. And those are my suggestions. And if with those two in effect, I would support the application.
If we remove that condition,
Hmm.
there's a way for the committee's decision to know that it was satisfied.
Which one?
Remove the minor variance parking condition. The only way the committee decision can be sure that it's satisfied is for it to be a condition of consent.
Okay, so having said that, I was looking at it in a different lens. If that's in fact the case, then that's what I was, that's my intent.
Yeah. So you're right, the minor variance has been deferred, so we're not considering the reduction in it. But in the consent, we're just saying you have to meet and we want proof that you're meeting it.
One question I had, I just have to circle back. I almost
Yeah.
forgot to ask it. Access, their comments. I'm looking for, there's a very free parking space straight on the site plan. I can't, if I can show me. It's there,
And accessibility is satisfied that it can be shared.
so that'll. It'll be fine. Okay.
Well, they'll be entering into a similar, yeah.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions from the gallery or from members or anybody in this room? Seeing none. Can I have a motion? We'll start with. Have any motion on this consent from any members?
Word of motion, understanding of the minor variance, how it, I think it's the same thing. And then just with a reference to the satisfaction, engineering and construction as a recommendation.
Provisional consent for the application 6 with those conditions.
Correct.
That's the condition of variance. And the 20-year was. Okay. Right. Can I have a second for that?
Second that.
Right.
With the condition.
Right, all in favor of that? Carried. Right, I thank everybody on that on those applications, those were strenuous. I think that we've got to where we need to be. I think a lot of questions were answered, of course. Michelle, if there are more questions, and I wish the best of luck to everybody in the circumstances, okay? Thank you,
Thank you, Chair and Committee.
thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could bring your committee's attention back to the first tab, A1424. There's nobody in the gallery representing this application, and so we should, Mr. Wanch, sorry, I thought, never mind what I thought. Okay, so it's tab 1, it's application A1424. Sean and Tricia Want are the owners of civic number 154 Denwood Drive, further identified as lot 61 Grandview Gardens A subdivision, former township of Rankin. It is located on the southeast corner of Birchwood Street and Denwood Drive. The subject property is designated residential in the official plan and is zoned R2 single unit residential. Relief is requested from the provisions of bylaw 2005-150 as amended to facilitate the demolition of the existing garage and the subsequent construction of a new 8.53 meter by 10.97 meter detached garage to include attic storage. Specifically, section 9.1.5, maximum building height permitted is 6 meters. The applicant is seeking to increase the maximum building height to 7.32 meters. Notice of public hearing was sent by personal mail to neighboring properties by posting a sign on site and by posting on the city website. Bell Canada did not respond. Building Division had no objection. Conservation Authority, Engineering and Construction, Fire Services did not respond. Legal Department had no comment. Planning Division had no objections given the size of the property and the distance from the lot lines. PUC Distribution Inc. Electric had no concerns. Public Utilities Commission Water had no concerns. My comments are there has been no written response from circulated property owners. Staff and outside agencies do not object to the request. There's been no evidence presented or submitted to suggest that approval would have a negative impact. And again, Mr. Chair, those are my submissions and Mr. Wanch is at the podium.
Watch. Coming a nice for us. I have no comments. Do you have any comments?
Any questions? Need to comment?
Mr. Bruni.
No, I have no comments. I'd support the application. It seems pretty clear. And I agree with the staff recommendations.
Ms. McGregor.
I agree. I like, it doesn't look like changing it's gonna have a negative impact around anything around it. And I also think it will improve the nice, like, in the area. So I go for it. I can't talk today. I'll just ramble for all afternoon.
For the application. Forward to Bruni, seconded. Is
I'll second. Thank you.
all in favor? Motion is carried. Mr. Khan. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
If I could bring the committee's decision or attention, seeing you can't talk, to tab 4 so that Mr. Urso can be heard and be relieved of his duty. The application is B524. The subject property owner is 3476847 Canada Inc., also known as the Cambrian Mall. It's in the former township of St. Mary's, municipally identified as civic number 44 Great Northern Road. It is located on the east side of Great Northern Road between Willoughby Street and McNabb Street. The subject property is designated residential in the official plan and is zoned R2 single unit residential. Subject to the final bylaw approval of rezoning application B424 ZOP, which has since happened, but hadn't happened at the time notice was circulated. The applicant is seeking the committee's consent to sever and convey a westerly 0.328 hectare parcel fronting on Great Northern Road and provide an easement for right-of-way purposes in favor of the proposed severed parcel. The proposed parcel and easement configurations are: sever, it would have 62.45 meters of width, length 59 meters, area approximately 0.328 hectares. The retained land would have 34.9 meter width on Great Northern Road, 283 meter depth, and approximately 1.7 hectares in size. The southerly easement would be 14.9 meters for a length of 56.8 meters and approximately 0.042 hectares in size in area. And the westerly easement would be 7.237 meters, length of approximately 50.8.014 meters for an area of approximately 0.085 hectares. The intent of the application is to facilitate the relocation of the BMO office from within the Cambrian Mall to the proposed severed parcel and provide a right-of-way over the proposed retained land in favor of the proposed severed parcel. Notice of public hearing was sent by personal mail to neighboring properties by posting a sign on site and by posting on the city's website. As there was no written submissions sent to me, and I don't believe there's anyone else in the gallery that wishes to comment. No. As part of the application review, this proposal was circulated to the following internal departments and external agencies for their review. Building Division had no objection, noting several open building permits are on this site, and that's just an advisement on the site of the Cambrian Mall. Conservation Authority did not comment. Engineering had no comments. Fire Services had no comment. Legal Department had no comment. Planning Division had no objections. PUC and Public Works did not comment. Planning staff noted that parking for the bank will fall under the shopping center site plan agreement to share parking between all uses on the mall property. This is required to ensure that by severing this portion, the overall property is able to maintain the required parking. Recommended conditions of any approval are payment of cash in lieu of parkland, payment of transfer review fee, provide transfer deed of land for certificate of official, provide reference plan, provide PIN abstract and PIN map, minor variance application approval if needed. We don't suspect there is, but that's confirmed once the plan is final. Discharge of charge or mortgage, partial discharge of charge or mortgage, and payment of taxes. And those are my submissions, Mr. Chair. And again, Mr. Urso is at the podium.
Pleasure, Mr. Urso. Do you have any comments for us?
Well, Mr. Chair, Madam Secretary and members of the committee, no, as usual, Michelle has the matter forward quite succinctly. Essentially, the new BMO structure be standalone. It'll be sitting adjacent to the propane depot that's there at the northwest corner. We were successful in the rezoning last month. This is the next step. And it fits with the major theme. If you'll notice, Churchill Plaza, what used to be Wellington Square Mall, they all have standalone developments in front of the main structures, and this seems to be the way the banking's going as well. If you just have to refer back to the Royal Bank up here on Great Northern Road, they've done the same thing. So my clients will be happy if we can get this matter solidified today, and we'll move on.
Thank you. Comments from committee members?
I don't have any comments. Be straightforward.
Seems to me the tests are met. Have a motion on the consent, please,
Put forth the motion. Approved.
with those conditions, Ms. McGreen.
Yes.
Do we have a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. Broody, all in favor? It's carried.
Thank you.
Mr. Urso.
Okay.
Four?
So we're at tab 4. And that tab 4 is a twofold tandem application with tab 4 and tab 5. The subject property is 5 Old Highway 17 North. I will go through the consent first. Dustin and Christina Grondin are the owners of 55 Old Highway 17 North. It's in the former township of Terran-Torres, being part 1 of 1R 10543 and lot 19 of Plan H 743. It is located on the east side of Highway 17 North at the southerly end of the street. The subject property is designated rural area in the official plan and is zoned RA rural area. It is irregular in shape and is approximately 3.8 hectares in size. Subject to final approval of minor variance application A1624, the applicant is seeking the committee's consent to sever and convey a northerly parcel fronting on Old Highway 17 North, being approximately 3.02 hectares in size, for future development purposes. The proposed parcel configurations are: the severed parcel would have a width at the street at 13.08 meters, length of 300 meters, and be approximately 3.02 hectares in size. The retained lands would have frontage on the street of 71.6 meters for a length of 132 meters and be approximately 0.81 hectares in size. Notice of public hearing was sent by personal mail to neighboring properties by posting a sign on site and by posting on the city's website. You're not here for that application, are you? No, okay, so there's no interested parties are present and no submissions were written or email submissions were submitted. As part of the application review, this proposal was circulated to the following internal departments and external agencies. Building Division had no objection. Conservation Authority did not respond. Engineering and Construction had no objections. Fire Services had no comment. Legal Department commented that turnaround agreement is in process, no additional comment. Planning Division had no objections. PUC Distribution Electric had no concerns. Public Utilities Commission for Water had no concerns. Public Works were supportive, conditional on the cooperation of the applicant to provide the city with a turnaround agreement. And as legal indicated, that's in process. Staff comments: there was no written response submitted from circulated property owners. Staff and outside agencies did not object to the request. No evidence has been submitted to suggest that approval would have a negative impact. Again, I'd like to read into the record planning's report on the frontage reduction. Planning has no objection to the reduce. I'll read that into the record when we move to minor variance application, sorry.
It's fine, Ms.
Um,
Kelly.
Planning have no objections to the consent. It is recommended that any approval be made conditional upon the applicant entering into a turnaround agreement with the city to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or her designate. If we move forward with the consent, recommended conditions are payment of cash in lieu of parkland, payment of transfer review fee, provide transfer deed of land, provide reference plan, provide PIN abstract and PIN map, minor variance if needed, discharge of charge or mortgage or partial discharge of charge or mortgage, payment of taxes, and entering into a turnaround agreement with the city to be registered on title. The minor variance, this consent is conditional on providing approval to a minor variance. The minor variance is to reduce the required lot frontage of the proposed parcel and legitimizing the location of the existing garage on the proposed retained parcel. Specifically, section 8.5.2, minimum required lot frontage is 45 meters. The applicant seeks to reduce the minimum required lot frontage for the proposed northerly parcel to 13 meters. Minimum interior side yard requirement for accessory buildings is 5 meters. The applicant seeks to reduce the south interior side yard to 4.6 meters for the existing 9.29 meter by 6.15 meter garage only. Notice of public hearing was sent by personal mail to neighboring properties by posting a sign on site and by posting on city website. And again, there was no response. Bell Canada had advised me this morning that they have no comment. Building division had no objections. Engineering and construction did not comment. Fire services had no comment. Legal department, again, turnaround agreement in process, no additional comment. Planning division had no objections. However, planning has no objections to the reduced south side yard for the existing garage and no objections to the reduced lot frontage from 45 meters to 13 meters. This location lacks a defined set character of the area, and neighboring lots are inconsistent in shape. The impact of this reduction is not anticipated to have adverse effects, as the lot is at the end of a roadway and abuts a non-residential use, being a golf course. To further develop large parcels, variances have been granted for a reduced frontage that will permit access to land that has the potential for development. Planning recommends that should this variance be granted, the portion of the parcel with a 13-meter frontage width be used for access only. There was no written response submitted from circulated property owners. Staff and outside agencies do not object to the request. No evidence has been presented or submitted to suggest that approval would have a negative impact. It is also recommended that any approval be made conditional on the applicant entering into a turnaround agreement with the city to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works and Engineering, and an additional request by planning that the variance be stipulated to the 13-meter width being for access only and no construction. And those are my submissions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Nobody in the gallery to speak to this matter. Start with the consent. Any comments?
I think you have to deal with the variance because without the variance, the consent can't go forward.
All right, we'll start with the variance. Any comments on variance application?
I don't have any comments. I believe the location, the area, the surrounding adjacent properties, I mean, it's consistent with the area. And those variances aren't imposing in any manner. That's been addressed in here and that I can see, so support you
With the condition?
with the conditions as staff recommend. Noted.
Yeah, can you just repeat the comment you made about the meter? accessory?
Okay, so as planning suggested, planning recommends that should this variance be granted, the portion of parcel with only 13-meter frontage being the width, the 13-meter width, be used for access
Just that
only,
driveway going.
so that they don't build in that driveway.
Yes, So at least then the variance, it's not.
Yes.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, I have no comments other than that.
In other words, the condition is that there will be no construction in that 30-meter width.
Yeah.
15-meter width.
Which is. Anyway. Okay,
All right, can I have a motion on the minor variance application?
motion to approve. With the conditions and to meet planning's recommendations.
You turn around,
Yes, and with the turnaround access.
I have a second for that motion. Seconded by Mr. Bruni, all in favor? Motion's carried.
So with the variance being approved, we can deal with consent.
Do you have any comments on the consent application?
I have no comments, no.
None? Motion on the consent?
Okay. I'll put forth a motion to approve and with the staff recommendations and conditions that were for.
Can I have a second for that motion? All in favor? It's carried. No.
Tab 7 on your agenda would be application B 824. There's no one in attendance for that either. Herb Vilas Inc., DNM Construction Management Limited, is the owner of Civic number 210 Pittsburgh Avenue. It is located on the northeast corner of Pittsburgh Avenue and Yonge Street. The subject property is designated residential in the official plan and is zoned R3 low density residential. It is irregular in shape and is approximately 3.8 hectares in size. The applicant is seeking the committee's consent to sever the subject property into 3 autonomous parcels for future residential development considerations. The proposed parcel configurations are 27.3 meter width at the street on a severed parcel, a length of 42.03 meters in an area of approximately 0.115 hectares. The second severed parcel would be of the same size. The third parcel would be 30.6 meters, slightly larger, for a length of 42.03 meters and having an area of approximately 0.129 hectares. No variances are required. The proposed configurations meet the zoning bylaw. Notice of public hearings sent by personal mail to neighboring properties, by posting a sign on site and by posting on the city's website. No one is in attendance on the application and no submissions were received. Building division had no objections. Conservation Authority didn't comment. Engineering and construction commented. There is a city easement along the back property line. There is only one sanitary lateral to the property. The applicant will be required to install the sanitary and water services for each lot and then repave the portion of the road that was excavated during the installation of services. Multiple patches for each service connection will not be acceptable. A servicing agreement may be required. 3, a lot grading and drainage plan must be completed by a lot grading professional to ensure that drainage is dealt with appropriately. Lot grading professionals must be a professional engineer, civil, architect, or Ontario land surveyor. Experienced in lot grading design, a drainage agreement may be required. 4, municipal consent permit is required for the construction work in the municipal right-of-way. And that would be at the time a building permit. They're simply advising the applicant of what's coming down the road. And finally, no work shall be commenced without the approval of the Director of Engineering or his designate. Any work which requires approval from the city and the Ministry of the Environment shall not commence until such approvals and agreements are in place. And again, that's the construction work and not the consent. The applicant is aware of those comments as well. Legal department had no comment. Planning division had no objections. PUC Electric and Water had no concerns. Public Works had no comment. No evidence of any opposition to the request. Recommended conditions of any approval are payment of cash in lieu, payment of transfer fee, provide of transfer deed of land for certificate of official, provide a lot grading and drainage plan completed by a lot grading professional, enter into a drainage agreement if deemed necessary, Provide reference plan, provide pin abstract and pin map, minor variance application approval if required, and I anticipate it won't be, but the survey will confirm that. Discharge of charge or mortgage, partial discharge of charge or mortgage, and payment of taxes. And those are my submissions, Mr. Chair. They cover the conditions requested by engineering that relate to a consent. And they give advisement of what they're looking at when they go to get a permit.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kelly. Seeing nobody in the gallery to speak to the matter. Any comments, committee members?
Comment is, this fits totally. Area, properties and actually. Of a bit of a, oh,
I second Frank. Just that's what when I looked at it, it looks like it meets the character of the neighborhood, so.
Can I have a motion on this consent? Conditions, perfect. I have a second for the
Second that motion.
favor. Motion's carried. Ms. Kelly,
Just to note that our next meeting is June, coming up quickly. They're coming up so quickly, June 12th. And Mr. Chair, if I could have a motion to adjourn.
for adjournment. Frank,
Disconnect.
in this mic. Very much.
And Frank, I'll do these first and